Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I am the Omni viewer, and in the past I've made no secret about my hatred for propaganda. Indeed, I actually find propaganda to be the worst form of art, even if it's high-quality stuff, based on what it is designed to do. Propaganda is about nothing but influencing beliefs, plain and simple. It keeps those who already agree with it placated, and it demoralizes and demonizes those who disagree with it. In propaganda, there is no room for discussion or nuance. The only goal is to prove the agenda, even if that proof is objectively nonsensical. Yeah, I don't like propaganda. With that said, however, I've actually got a piece of vintage propaganda in my extensive book collection that I find very interesting, not because of what's in it, but because of how it's been presented in the modern day. First, though, a little backstory. The 1930s were, to put it mildly, a rough time. Not only was the Great Depression in full swing, but global tensions were on the rise to such a degree that another war seemed inevitable. Here in America, though, we had no interest in getting involved in the brewing European war. We'd already interceded in the last one under protest, and we figured if they wanted to go for another round, that was their problem, not ours. No, we were looking in the other direction. It was impossible to ignore how the Japanese Empire was spreading not just to continental Asia, but also across the Pacific Ocean, and how they were building their military up as if preparing for combat. Indeed, that's exactly what Japan was doing. The government and military knew that the empire's expansion would at some point lead to conflict with the United States. The only unanswered question was who would fire the first shot. Of course, that question would eventually be answered in 1941 on December 7th, not coincidentally this video's premiere date. Before then, however, speculation about how such a war would turn out was commonplace on both sides of the vast ocean. For our purposes, let us settle in December of 1933, exactly 8 years before the attack on Pearl Harbor. At this time, Hawaii is a U.S. territory with a strong military presence, but it's not officially a state. It's also where a lot of Japanese immigrants have decided to settle down, with many of them founding different businesses to import and export various goods, including books. One particular book shipment arrives in this month containing books penned by a retired Japanese naval officer by the name of Kyosuke Fukunaga. The original title is Nichibei-sen Miraiki, but the English title is Account of the Future U.S.-Japan War. Sensing trouble, the Japanese-American shopkeepers who received these shipments contact the government. An investigation confirms that these books, though categorized as pulp novels, are propaganda pieces meant to stir up Japanese-American citizens to side with their birth nation if and when such a war happens, as well as to discourage the rest of America from challenging Imperial Japan's naval might. Among war historians and literary scholars alike, this book becomes known as the first Japanese bomb dropped on America. In a figurative sense, of course. Just to be clear, Account of the Future U.S.-Japan War didn't exist in a vacuum. Like Omni said, lots of people were speculating about a future conflict, including fiction authors in both Japan and the States, and not everyone on either side was optimistic. Some Japanese writers at the time foresaw disaster in Japan challenging America, while some American writers felt that America simply wasn't prepared for another international war, certainly not against Japan. Account of the Future U.S.-Japan War stands out largely thanks to how it was snuck overseas in advance of the real conflict. That alone gives it historical significance. Now, I read this entire sordid tale from cover to cover, and I can tell you this much. Like any piece of propaganda, the ideas within have aged very poorly. The story begins in 1936 with a shocking event. A Japanese naval commander, acting on his own, orders the crew of his destroyer to attack and sink an American ship, which they do successfully. Despite some diplomatic attempts to maintain peace, this event proves to be the tipping point that finally pushes the two nations into all-out naval war. From there, it recounts the entire war right up until its end, where the American Navy is overwhelmed by the Japanese Navy, thus forcing a surrender and concession. That's the basic gist of it, anyway. We do follow a few characters throughout, specifically a man named Yamano, who had initially deserted the Navy for personal reasons and was hiding out in Manchuria, but feels compelled to rejoin when war is declared. We also get various vignettes about different incidents that explain how bad the Americans have it, and that's where the propaganda really kicks in. You see, a lot of what happens in this book is designed to depict America as not only ill-equipped for war, but also severely internally disjointed. In Chapter 3, for example, the American battleship Oklahoma tries to get across the Panama Canal only to be sabotaged with explosions by the black crewmen. This was based on a Japanese belief that African Americans would be more sympathetic towards Japan than America, where prejudice was still common. As we now know, that didn't turn out to be the case. While prejudices were still prevalent at the time, patriotism is what ultimately won out. In the final chapter, the primary thing that gives the Japanese Navy the advantage is a storm that ravages the American Navy in advance, almost as if to say that nature itself was playing favorites. The Americans couldn't ride the storm out, lost a lot of ships and planes, and thus never stood a chance. Perhaps most outrageous of all, the original foreword for the novel ends with Fukunaga apologizing for... Actually, you know what? Let me just read it to you. I wish to apologize beforehand in one respect. This is what I mean. In the beginning of the story, the illegal sinking of an American warship by a Japanese destroyer is described. I personally do not believe that any officer of our present Navy would be guilty of ordering such a rash act. I state this fact to protect the good name of Imperial Japanese naval officers. Naturally, however, I personally can harbor such lawless ideas because I have long since been retired from active service due to physical disability. Of course, when Japan struck first in actual history, it was officially sanctioned, not a rogue act. Okay, so the book is propaganda. We've established that. And we've also established that I don't like propaganda. That said, though, I would actually recommend that each of you track down a copy of this book to read, specifically this version edited and annotated by Jamie Bisher. Why, you may ask? Because in this version, you might actually learn something of value. This annotated version of Nichibei-sen Miraiki is packed to the gills with actual history. In fact, that stuff I said at the beginning about how the book got to America is paraphrased from the introduction, and what I said only scratches the surface. The foreword contains way more insights about the socio-political climate of the time in both America and Japan, and it just might contain some facts you didn't learn in school. I'm intentionally not recapping all of the details here as further incentive for you to get your own copies. As for the story proper, the original text of the novel is preserved, but throughout are various annotations to explain certain things that are otherwise presented without explanation, such as locations, ships, and lesser-known historical events. Oftentimes, these notes will provide the actual history of the many real ships that appear in the book, clarify if they were still active when the war finally began, and even point out the one ship that never existed at all. We also get a plethora of vintage black and white photographs to show us exactly what the text describes, or at least what might have inspired it, thus further contrasting fiction with reality. Sounds kind of surreal to me. You're reading something that's essentially an alternate history while getting pictures of actual history. That's 2 histories for the price of 1. Can't beat a bargain like that. Agreed. Moreover, I think this book provides a good template and a solid argument for media preservation. I'm a free speech advocate, and even though I can agree that some pieces of media don't age well, I don't believe that altering them or censoring them solves anything. Similarly, I don't think that trigger warnings do any good. A trigger warning only serves to signal that a person should be offended going in, and they tend to be applied where they are not even necessary. I mean, seriously, whose bright idea was it to put a trigger warning on Blazing Saddles? It's rated R, that's enough. Nobody watches R-rated movies expecting them to be safe and harmless and inoffensive. Anyway, this book has the right idea. Preserve the original work, but present it with context and use it as a means of education. I've always thought that was a good idea, and this tome provides a great example of what that idea looks like in practice. As such, this is probably the only piece of blatant propaganda you'll ever hear me recommend. So, yeah, track down a copy, not so you can be brainwashed, but so you can learn. Until such time as we meet again, this is the Omni Viewer signing off. Consider this video dedicated to everyone who lost their lives during the war, and I do mean everyone. God willing, we'll never see the like of it again in our lifetimes.